I'd like to welcome you back to this walk through the book of Romans. Let me just say this. If you didn't listen yesterday, go back and listen to yesterday's podcast. In fact, go back and listen to all this week as we've finished the 7th chapter of the book of Romans and are now at the beginning parts of the 8th chapter. Verses 1 and 2 of the 8th chapter are very, very important to your Christian life. You see, the book of Romans, again, it's talking about your salvation. It's talking about your relationship with God. It's talking about living in victory over this warfare that we have going on the inside of us. So go back and listen to that. But now today we're picking up in verse number 3. And in verse number 3 of the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul writes this, "For what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh, God did." What couldn't the law do? Now here, the law is not talking about the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, which we talked about yesterday. It's talking about the law. It's talking about the commandments, the Jewish law. And so he says what the law could not do. He didn't say the law was wrong. He didn't say the law was bad. He said the law was limited. What the law could not do. Now, I believe in reading the law. I believe that the 10 Commandments should be posted in every classroom, every courtroom. I believe in the law. But the law is limited. It couldn't do something. And what couldn't it do? It couldn't take away the weakness that a man has in the flesh. Notice what the Apostle Paul says. For what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh. You see, the law didn't take care of your flesh. It didn't take care of this place where sin lives and abides. It didn't set you free from your sin. It didn't set you free from your flesh. And so he says, for what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh, God did. God did it. Who did it? God did it. God did. How did he do it? Sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. What did God do? How did God do that? How did God set us free from the law of sin and death? How did he do it? He did it by sending his Son, his own Son. When we see this in the Greek language, it means the only Son that he has. He sent the only answer to our problem. He sent Jesus, his own Son. Just think about that. But he sent him in the likeness of sinful flesh. How many of you know Jesus actually lived here on earth in the flesh? Now, was Jesus sinless? Yes. But did he have a flesh that could give in to sin? Yes. Jesus was tempted just like we are. The only difference between him and us is that he never yielded to sin like we yield to sin. And so he says that God sent his own Son in likeness of sinful flesh. Doesn't mean that Jesus was a sinner. Anything that portrays Jesus as a sinner is garbage. Don't watch it. Did he come in the flesh? Yes. Was he tempted in the flesh? Yes. Was he sin? Did he sin? No. He overcame sin. That's a whole different lesson. But then he goes on and he says, as an offering for sin. Why did Jesus come? Did he come to be some political ruler? You know, that's what many of the Jews thought. In fact, all of the Jews thought that at one time. That he was coming to lead a revolt against the Roman government. That he was going to come as a ruler. No, Jesus came, and he came as a man because, you know what? Only a man could pay the price of sin or for sin. So Jesus came. He came in the form of a man. He came with sinful flesh. But then he was an offering for sin. You see, when Jesus went to the cross, he went to the cross as an offering. He offered himself. And in offering himself, he took our sin and he gave us his righteousness. You know, covenant is always two-sided. Each person gives and takes. Jesus came and he gave us his righteousness, but he took our sin. He gave us his strength, his authority, but he took our weaknesses. He was an offering for our sin. And then the last part of that verse says this, and he condemned sin in the flesh. What did Jesus do? He condemned sin in the flesh. He did away with it. He sentenced it in the flesh. Now quickly going on to verse number 4. So that the requirement of the law might be fulfilled. Why did he do that? So that all the requirements that were in the law, that sacrifice needed to be made, that an offering needed to be made. Those were the requirements of the law. So that the requirements of the law might be fulfilled, completed, 100% done in us, for us. And then the last part of verse number 4. Who are not walking according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. When he says according, this word is used metaphorically, and it means to be dependent upon. Dependent upon. We depend upon not the flesh, not the sarx, this flesh that's filled with sin, but we depend upon the Spirit. I hope that this is becoming a revelation to you, that the way that you can walk in victory is by depending on the Spirit of God, the Spirit of life, which is in Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit of life, which is in Christ Jesus. Thank you for watching this week. Join us again next week as we continue our walk through the book of Romans.